Welcome to everyone, and as we traverse virtually through various time zones, let me just say it's a great day. And welcome to everyone on our social media platforms, those who are here on this Zoom platform. Today is a great day as Whiteboard Labs and BOLD, Building Opportunities for Leadership Development Incorporated, come together to celebrate the 111th International Women's Day with a series of panel discussions on the topic, the glass ceiling. Baldwin Powell, Director of Building Opportunities for Leadership Development Incorporated, a leadership and training consultancy company based in Jamaica. But before we introduce our esteemed guests and start in what promises to be a most engaging discussion, let's look at the definition of the term glass ceiling. The glass ceiling refers to the sometimes invisible barrier to success that many women come up against in their careers. It was management consultant Marilyn of the UK that coined the phrase almost 44 years ago, and she maintains it is as relevant and topical as ever. And so it is my inestimable pleasure to introduce and present to you our illustrious panelists, who are two powerful, influential, and high-achieving women from the Caribbean, Dr. Carla Barnett, Dr. Luiz Longsworth. Dr. Carla Barnett is the first female Secretary General of the Caribbean Community, otherwise known as CARICOM. Dr. Barnett is an economist across the English-speaking Caribbean and has broken several barriers, I dare say glass ceiling barriers, along the way. She was the first woman to be appointed as Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Belize. She was the first woman and youngest person to be appointed as Deputy Secretary General of CARICOM. First woman to be appointed as Financial Secretary in Belize. She has also worked at the Caribbean Development Bank as a country economist and as a Vice President of Operations. As a consultant, Dr. Barnett has provided advisory services to a range of multilateral and bilateral agencies working across the CARICOM region, including the Inter-American Development Bank, Canadian International Development Agency, known as FAIRS Canada, United Kingdom Department for International Development, and the United Nations Development Program. Dr. Barnett was a candidate for the United Democratic Party in the Freetown constituency in 2015. She lost to the then leader of the opposition, but was subsequently appointed to the Senate as Vice President and a Minister of State in the 2015 to 2020 Belize government. She's a longtime advocate for gender equality, not only because it's the right thing to do to create a more stable and equitable society, but also because gender equality makes good economic policy. She's an active member of the Caribbean Institute of Women in Leadership, Belize chapter. She continues to serve on the board of the Belize YWCA and is a past president. She served on the board of Haven House, which is a shelter for battered women. Dr. Barnett has received several notable awards, including the insignia of the Commander of the British Empire for Distinguished Public Service and the Alumni Achievement Awards by her schools in Belize, St. Catherine Academy, St. John's College, and the UWI Belize Alumni Association Award for Excellence in Economics and Development. Welcome, Dr. Barnett. I now introduce my esteemed colleague and friend, Dr. Luiz Longsworth. She holds a doctorate in business administration in higher education management from the University of Bath in the United Kingdom, a Bachelor of Arts in Spanish and French, an MBA in marketing from the University of the West Indies, Mona campus, and a Master of Arts degree in Hispanic Studies from Queen's University, Ontario, Canada. Her research and practice focus on virtual leadership in higher education leadership development, women in leadership, and organizational transformation and change. With almost 30 years of service to the UWI, Dr. Longsworth has held senior posts in the university, including campus director of the UWI Mono Western Jamaica campus, director of the Open Campus Country Sites, and director of the School of Continuing Studies. In July 2021, she ended her tenure with the university as Pro-Vice Chancellor of Global Affairs and Principal of the University of the West Indies Open Campus, which is the online and flexible learning campus of the UWI. As of September 2021, she launched her own independent consultancy practice in the areas of higher education, leadership management, and currently is a lead project consultant for the establishment of the Gordon Butch Stewart International School for Hospitality and Tourism Management, to be located in Montego Bay, Jamaica, in partnership with Sandals Resorts International, University of the West Indies, and Florida International University. In addition to a career in university teaching and leadership, Dr. Longsworth has held senior leadership roles in the private sector, the areas of manufacturing and financial services in Jamaica, British Virgin Islands, and Belize. Over the past 20 years, she has also participated in consultancies across the region and in the UK, working with international and regional organizations and companies, Ernst & Caribbean, Unicommer, Court, Belize, the Leadership Foundation UK, Sandals Resorts, among many others. She is a highly sought after speaker and consultant on issues regarding leadership and organizational transformation in higher education, women in leadership, mentorship, and coaching. Keenly community-oriented, Dr. Longsworth has worked with at-risk in Jamaica, Belize, Barbados, and the British Virgin Islands, as well as served on new boards that are community-based. As an honorary fellow of the Vancouver-based Commonwealth of Learning since 2016, and a member of their Commonwealth Wise Women Initiative, she's also involved in mentoring young women across the Commonwealth. And so, as you can see, these ladies are eminently qualified to be a part of this distinguished panel as we discuss the glass ceiling. And so I think I'll direct a question as an opener. We're going to encourage persons to participate in the chat room, and at the end we'll have a Q&A. But Dr. Barrett, I'd like to direct this question to you first, and then Dr. Longsworth, you can join in as well as to give your other contributions. What has changed for working women since the expression became popular in 1978? Do you think women seem unable to climb the career ladder beyond the lowest rung of middle management? Let's start with that as an opening remark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Powell. Before I even try to answer that, let me say a special hello to Luz, who I know from Belize, of course, who I haven't seen in a long time, but who is one of my most admired women. And I say that especially because, you know, we're not supposed to say that. We're not supposed to speak of the admiration that we have for each other. And so I'm just putting it out there. Luz is one of my most admired women, for who she is, for what she stands for what she's accomplished in her life. And I'm sure that what you read out was just half of it. You asked a question about whether or not women are basically still coming up against the glass ceiling. Of course they are. When Luz asked me to participate in this discussion about the glass ceiling, I said to her, you know, the first thing I will have to say, and I'll get it out of the way one time, is that the fact that I have moved up and I'm now the Secretary General does not in any way suggest that this is the exception that proves the rule. There is still in place quite a glass ceiling. And when I talk about the glass ceiling, I talk about the sometimes invisible, most times invisible barriers We're not talking about laws in place or any such thing. We're talking about invisible barriers that stand in the way of progress for women in some fields more than in others. There is a tendency that we have in the Caribbean sometimes to talk about the progress that women have made, for example, in academia, because we have more women coming out of university than men at this stage. And I attribute that to two things. One, women know going in that they have to be more qualified for the same position. So we set about doing that. That's we know that that is what it will take. And the second thing, of course, is that the barriers that are in our place, because they're invisible, we do really feel a need for us to differentiate ourselves from everybody else. That's the reality. That puts an added amount of pressure on us as women, but it also does allow us to move forward into positions that open up. But it is not as if the glass ceiling has shattered at all. And just in case we want to take that picture of a shattering glass ceiling any further, you know that when glass breaks, people get hurt, right? So you know that it is not an easy thing, and you have to be very careful how how you come up against a glass ceiling, because you can get really hurt. I know of women who have gotten really hurt trying to move into areas that are not necessarily seen as areas where women ought to be. So yes, the glass ceiling is still there. We have a lot of work to do, and we cannot stop. You know, it's over 111 years since the women in Europe took to the streets to demand, first of all, the right to vote, because it took a long time for women to even be given the right to vote. And then the right to participate in leadership, in political leadership, but not only there, leaders in business. And even though we have a lot more women managers, for example, in the Caribbean than other places, not women top managers. We're still way behind in the top management. So yeah, the glass ceiling is there.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Good, Doctor.
Sorry, let me just say this is definitely a mutual admiration society, because I think Carla knows a long time that we've worked together, we've known each other, and she is one of my favorite leaders as well, because of just as she said of me, of who she is, of her determination, her intentionality, and also her own personal support of women, which I have been a beneficiary of. So it's good to see you again, and especially to see you in this new role. You know, I was one of those dancing on the tables when I heard, and holding my breath for the announcement, but I was always confident. So I concur fully. I think that, you know, people say that the Caribbean is one of the regions that's shattering the glass ceiling more than, let's say, in Asia, and even in some cases more than in North America and Europe. But I do feel that to some extent is an illusion. I prefer to use a different analogy for what is happening with us. And it's not that we're shattering the glass ceiling. I think what is happening is that the glass ceiling is moving apart like a sliding French door, letting in one or two people and closes back down. And that in itself is, in my mind, we're not really there. And we have to be cautious of that, because it gives us a false impression of what is actually happening behind the scenes in terms of the pipeline of women. And as Dr. Barnett said, that yes, we see women in education, for instance. So we have to go into the statistics, and I'll share a little bit of what I have here. Let's say higher education. I use my own institution that I served for over 30 years. Women are the highest number of graduates. Yet women are also the largest number of the middle managers. So you have that bulge in the middle, or of lecturers, assistant lecturers, senior lecturers. But in terms of the professorial rank, it's about 30% of the professors are female. Looking at the leadership, in almost 75 years of existence, the university has only had 5 female principals, and I was one. And they have had no female vice chancellors, and certainly no female chancellor since Princess Alice, and she was, you know, the one that started the whole thing and got there because of the Royal Charter. So even in higher education, where we have been advocates for gender equality, there are serious lack of female equality there. Recently, in a report from Deloitte, we saw some new statistics coming out using Barbados. And as Dr. Barnett said, again, women are in middle management and many are in senior management. But for Barbados, I was rather surprised, because I had some statistics for the Caribbean, that only 6% of the CEOs are female. 6% of CEOs are female. And only 23% of board members are female, and they had no female chairs of boards in Barbados in the private sector. It's different in the public sector, but not a lot. Overall, what we're seeing is that in the Caribbean, about 25% of boards have women, and about 18 to 20% of them have female chairs. So we have a ways to go, and we should be cautious of buying into the argument that we in the Caribbean, women run things, you know, we hear that. That is not so, which is why that glass ceiling is so deceptive, because even for us, we may be actually up there and not realizing what is happening below us. So I will pause there, Baldwin, in case you wanted to ask any follow-up questions.
Well, yes, I'm interested in a statement that was made recently by Dr. Herbert Gale, social anthropologist, who, in tracing the number of females that are going on into higher education, that he noted that in the 1970s, for every 100 boys that were going on to higher education, only 60 girls were going forward. And presently, for every 100 boys, it's now gone to 280. And that was suggesting that a lot of that it's a good thing for the girls. It's not very good for the boys to be, stepping backward. But he was saying that it is supported by the international development partners of an agenda of WAG, women and girls only. So his argument was there's still a lot of advancement and progress and support for girls in education. How would you respond to that in light of the glass ceiling phenomenon?
If I may suggest that one of the things we have to be careful that we don't do is to suggest that women advance at the expense of men, because that's not the reality. We are coming out of hundreds of years of men being totally in charge. And maybe what we're experiencing in the long global span of history is a backlash of some kind. I don't know. But I don't really think it's that. I think women know that in order to move forward, we have to go to school. We have to become educated. We have to become qualified, because we are not taken seriously if we don't. The same is not true for men. The same is still not true for men. That's a reality that we live with. That's not to say that we don't have to be concerned about what's happening with our men and boys. We do. But it's not two sides of the same coin. There are two different sets of issues that fuel on the one hand, the deterioration that we are experiencing in terms of the performance of young boys in school and what's happening in the community. We cannot put that at the feet of women. That's one set. The other thing that we're experiencing is the advancing of women and girls. And yes, there are resources that are going there, because without those resources going there, we would still be behind. I've reached a stage where we need, you know, in Jamaica, you say that one hand can't clap, something like that. You need the two hands. And if we are going to get into this conversation of one group advancing at the expense of the other, what we are doing is perpetuating that antagonistic kind of relationship that's not very helpful. We have to figure out what's happening with our boys and our men and what's happening with our girls and our women, and sort it out at that level. They're not two sides of the same coin, and we are not seeing one set advance at the expense of the other. We are coming from centuries of being behind. And you look at what's happening, where there's really not adequate levels of fairness in once we move past management going. No, it's not. So there still are issues to be dealt with there, and it's really not helpful to put the issues of men and boys at the feet of women. Thank you.
I totally agree with what
Dr. Longsworth would like to respond as well.
Yes, I totally agree that is yet again, to me, another way of putting women in their place. Oh, you are usurping the role of men by coming out in too many quantities out of higher education and I think that sometimes we look at it as some kind of competition, and it isn't. And there are different sociological and political and economic reasons why this is happening in our schools, which, as Dr. Barnett says, that's a different issue. And if we simplify it by saying, oh, girls are taking over, then we're not being fair to the boys and men who have other issues that are holding them back, that the society needs to face and to fix. But the women also, I feel that this is a rebalancing. And that's how nature is. Nature has a way of swinging the pendulum to balance things out, and that we will see the things balance back if we are intentional and deliberate about it. The fact of the matter is that once again, we don't go behind the headlines. There's a story, a show like that. What are women studying? What are they earning? Look at where they're being employed and how they're being employed. And some of the studies are showing that women are still being underpaid compared to the men who come out with the same qualifications and even less. They are still in lower level jobs compared to men of equal educational levels. And those are the issues that women are worried about, that women face. There are some other issues too, but we'll probably talk about those later. And I do think I see some questions. I won't usurp the questions about what are the men studying, and how are they being prepared for the future versus women. So I think that for the Caribbean, we must not allow ourselves to be misled by a perception that women have fully overcome. We need to look beneath the surface. And as I think we both agree, that the issues of young men who are being marginalized cannot be converged with the issues of women who have always been marginalized and are now moving more into the center of economic development and empowerment. So my colleague, Dr. Gill, is excellent, and I respect that, but I'm sure that he would agree that there is more to it than just women outshining men.
We'll have to get him on board one of these days and have a part two. But let me just go to the chat room. We have two very good questions. One from Kathy. Does gender equality mean compromise on quality and expertise? please comment in the context of investment in STEM subjects for girls and boys, and the fact that half the babies born each year are by teenage mothers. Then we'll take the question from Veronica Simon right after.
Okay, if I may try to respond at least to a part of this, which talks about whether gender equality means compromise on quality and expertise. Of course it doesn't. It doesn't at all. And as we keep saying, very often women are less paid for the same qualifications. That's part of what happens. And we tend to be required to sort of prove our qualifications up front in order to be taken seriously. That's another reality. In terms of the investment in STEM subject for girls and boys, the fact that there has had to be a call for emphasis on STEM for girls is telling you that there is a need for us to encourage girls to go into the sciences, because it still is the case that there is active moving girls away from those kinds of subjects. And the reality, even in certainly when I was at university many years ago, girls were not really in the straight sciences because they were discouraged from going into the straight sciences. I know girls who wanted to be engineers who were asked upfront, why you want to get in the dirt with the men? And, you know, there is nothing about the way girls and boys are made that really ought to translate into the exclusion of anybody from any of the areas of study that they would want. And of course, the converse is true for boys. There's nothing that stops them from going into the arts or any other place. But we have socialized in the past our girls and boys to want to do different things, and we need to stop that. It's my view, they ought to be able to do both. The fact that the other part of this question, the fact that about half the babies born each year are by teenage mothers, some of them are fathered by teenage fathers too, and some of them by older men who take advantage of young girls. So we know that there are a lot of other kinds of social issues that underlies that statistic there. And we do have to be concerned about them, because in many instances, that is one of the things that hold back young women from developing as well, becoming mothers too early, in situations that are exploitative sometimes, and that are just, you know, the reality that they face because of marginalization that occurs. So these are all important things that we have to take into account. But bottom line, no, we're not talking about compromising on quality and expertise at all. On the other hand, what we're asking is for there to be equality in how we assess the fact that qualifications may be identical between men and women. Thanks.
There is also another question, and then we're going to come back to Kathy. She has a part 2 to the part 1. But Veronica is asking, would our panelists agree that there is a reluctance among many women to put themselves forward for leadership because of the view that women are held to much higher standards than men are, particularly in the political arena? Women are scrutinized in ways that men are certainly not.
Can I take that one?
Go right ahead.
I have two approaches to that question from Dr. Simon. And the first one, I just want to illustrate it a little bit, if I may, Baldwin, with a little cartoon that a friend of mine shared. I don't know if everyone is seeing that little cartoon. It is a cartoon that shows a race, and it has 3 men and 3 women. And if you can see it clearly, you will see that the men have clear lanes and the women have several obstacles. So while the men are running maybe a 200-meter, flat, the women are running a 200-meter obstacle course, while apparently being equal, setting off equally. And indeed, one of the reasons that I think women are often reluctant, and I would actually just confess this for myself, is that you realize that as a woman, sometimes you have certain responsibilities that will not go away no matter where you are, and you have to make some choices. So for example, at a time when I believe in the academy and in business, men are making their strides forward, those are the childbearing years for women. And the choices are often very limited, especially if there's little childcare. We saw that in the pandemic, for example, that the lack of childcare is one thing that definitely held women back and has really led to women making some serious decisions about what they do in terms of their career. So the first thing is that while we are striving for equality, we must be careful that that equality is not moving into equity, into equitable access. So while we have the same qualifications, while we may have the same access to the job, do we have the enabling environment to allow us to do that job well? So, a lot of women consider that and hold back and may in fact delay their own entry into senior leadership and particularly into politics, but I won't speak about politics. I think Dr. Barnett is probably better than me to speak about the political arena. The second thing, and I would again say that, certainly have experienced it, and I suspect my colleague on the panel has too, is what is being called in the research the glass cliff for women. And in my mind, the glass ceiling is not as dangerous when it comes to hurting you as the glass cliff. And many women are in the research coming out of North America, they've seen where women are often put into positions of leadership for failing institutions, because they feel that women have the capacity to build consensus and to get things going. But when the institution still fails, the woman is the first person to be thrown out. I've also seen that in politics, in an anecdotal way, that the treatment of a woman who is accused, let's say, of a corrupt act versus the treatment of a man, it's totally different, totally different. And the woman is maligned, whereas sometimes the men keep coming back. You never really see the women come back. So the glass cliff is a real phenomenon, and women going into leadership, instinctively, we know this. We know that we are held to a higher standard, and some women are really not prepared to do that. How do we overcome that? We have to really level that playing field. And we women who are in leadership already, we have to, and that's my personal theory, we have to work to help our colleagues by really looking through what I call the glass bottom. And that is a Caribbean thing, a glass bottom boat, because so much is happening under the surface of an organization to often undermine women and their move forward, that it is very important that we have our own equivalent, let's say, but I don't even like the term, of the old boys club. How do we mentor, protect, and guide our women from the sharks that are swimming around in the sea? So we as women in leadership, we have to look down below the glass bottom and help them as they climb up to shatter that glass ceiling. So that's my contribution. I think
before Dr. Barnett, I just wanted to share that, Dr. Longsworth, after you shared that clip, and I shared it with somebody else, that person said, something, knowing our women, they would use that as an opportunity and race that race as a hurdles event, and that they would still excel. So for what it's worth, it depends on how we look at things, what lens are we looking at, looking through, So, Barnett, please go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the political arena, both from a participant in the process point of view and from the point of view of somebody who has worked to promote women in political leadership, being involved in education and training sessions and that sort of thing over many years. And I like to tell the story of many years ago, I was involved in a conversation about training women for political participation in politics. And I was having a conversation with a gentleman who shall remain nameless, who is a politician, who said to me, yes, we do want women involved, but you know, we would want them to get some training and that sort of thing first. And so my response to him was, yes, but can I ask you who trained you before you got involved? And what kind of training? And there's absolutely no training. So when we have to be very careful when we talk about training women for participating in politics, that we're not buying into that myth that there is some special set of skills that only men have and women have to learn in order to be able to participate, because that's not the case. And by and large, where women become involved in politics, they tend to be women who are really well qualified. They're, because of the hurdles that they have to get over in terms of taking care of home and family, they tend to come in at a more mature stage in life with a lot of experience under their belts. And that's the reality. Oftentimes, this does not really count. It still is the fact that we do see when women offer themselves for participation, they are not necessarily given the sure seats to run in. It's an upward battle. The issue of accessing campaign financing also is not equitable across men and women. So the barriers are there, but the very assumption sometimes that women need to be trained in a particular kind of way to learn how governments should run before you become involved. There's a fundamental assumption that we have to be careful of, that we don't belong there, so we have to train you to do that. And so that's not an argument that I buy in. So whenever I participate in anything that is seeking to encourage women, to train up women, so to speak, to become involved in it, for me, it always starts at that level. I am not doing this because I think you are not qualified. I'm doing this because I think we want to have our best people involved in this process. And so that's the reality. Now, is it the case that much more is expected of women? Yes, in politics as in everywhere else. You cannot make any little mistake, because as Dr. Longsworth said, any little mistake is magnified. Nobody is perfect, so you know you will make mistakes, but it is magnified when it's done by a woman. Issues of quote unquote public morality are something that men get over much more easily than women. So the moralistic approaches are put as barriers to women as opposed to men. Sometimes that's actually something that's respected, you know. So we have to be that's the reality of what we're talking about when we say that the playing field is not level, when we're talking about women participating in politics and men participating in politics. The levels of judgment and the kinds of judgment that are made are not the same, and women are held to a much higher standard than men are. Thanks.
Okay, and thank you too for that contribution. Thank you very much, Dr. Simon, for that question. Let's get back to Kathy. How does the massive brain drain the Caribbean has been experiencing for decades affect gender equality in the remaining population? Good question.
I wouldn't know. I think that is something that would bear some in-depth research. I don't know what the numbers would show. I do know that over a long period of time, we've had a lot of women teachers and nurses, because it's the caring professions that have really been attracted away from the region in the greatest proportion based on the little bit of data that I've seen. So nurses and teachers and in a previous generation, maybe household help and that kind of thing. And so that would have been part of what has kept families kind of splitting up on the ground in the Caribbean. And for me, that may be something that could be contributed to instability in families. I don't know, but it's something that I think bears a lot of research, because what comes out in these kinds of discussion tends to be, you know, how we think it ought to, but there's not the foundation research done yet that needs to be done. But I think that the outward flow of qualified, educated persons from the region, male or female, is something that we need to talk about generally, because we have lost a good number of persons who have moved away from our region, and so that human resource impact is something that we do have to take into account. But as I say, I think we need to do a little bit of work, or maybe it's done and I just don't know, in terms of the impact of that on gender equality within the region, because I really don't know.
Okay, thanks again for that. Kathy is saying, will the panelists comment? Well, she's very grateful for your responses. Will the panelists comment on the schooling of girls, so the route is smoother for the same positions as those which are more popular for men?
Well, let me kick off a bit, because it would build on what Dr. Barnett said earlier, that we're coming from a time when girls were discouraged, actively discouraged from doing the hard sciences, you know, as if the arts were any easier. But and similarly, boys discouraged from doing the arts as well. So I think that to a large extent that is changing in our school system, that there is more equity in terms of encouraging girls to do the sciences, as we know in Industry 4.0, and that's something that you know, Whiteboard Labs and Bold has been working on very, very, very closely in this new environment of technology, that we are seeing that when you look at, let's say, the computer science classes, you're still seeing more boys. When you look at things like networking, software engineering, you're still seeing more males. And I believe it is important that from the school system, that is clear to both boys and girls what the future of work is, and encourage them, you know, to do those. And in similar light, not to discourage the boys from doing nursing, because as Dr. Barnett said, you know, nursing is one of the and the healthcare industry, it is now so much in demand, you know, so there is no reason why we should privilege one or the other, but we should look at what the future of work is and ensure that all of our children are being put into areas where they can contribute and where they are enthusiastic and passionate, you know, no matter what their gender. So, you know, in terms of what can we do in terms to school girls, parents, it starts in the home, not reinforcing those stereotypes as to who must play with the fire truck and who must play with the doll. That still happens. I still see it, you know, and especially in the Caribbean, where we have so many stereotypes about what boys are and who they are. That puts a lot of pressure on our men as well to be people that they don't necessarily want to be. So I feel that we must start with the home and enabling our children to make their choices. And then, of course, the schools should have the equitable access to all areas and encouraging the girls to go into those hard, what they call the hard sciences, or those areas now where the world of work is demanding more technologically savvy people. So I think that's about as much as I can say on that. I don't know if Dr. Barnett wants to add anything to that question.
Not at all, Luz. I think you've said it all. It needs to be equitable access to all areas, and we have to move away from this sharp socialization into what is girly and what is more manly, because that's half of the confusion that we have. And the new demands that we're seeing for nurses, you talked about, absolutely, nurses and teachers. Nurses and teachers are primarily women in the Caribbean, and there's a great demand for nurses and teachers globally at this stage. And there's no reason why men ought not to be reaching into that as well. Thanks.
Okay. Believe it or not, I think we only have time to have one last question, because I know Dr. Barnett on a tight schedule, and we are so appreciative of your commitment and sacrifice in coming to be with us. So this last question is from Dee Marie Myvet. Do you believe that the informal structures, commonly labeled as the boys' club, significantly contribute to the glass ceiling phenomenon, as men readily quote and advocate for their male peers, thereby enabling easier access to upward mobility? Go right ahead.
Let me go first.
Eager to hear.
I could tell stories, I could write books on this one. It's not only the boys' club in terms of coaching and advocating for one another. It's also about organizing where decisions are made. Decisions are often made in places that women don't necessarily go. And there's a story I like to tell, and I will tell it here. Many years ago, when I was at the central bank, I went up to Canada, and I was meeting with one woman who was the head of an organization that tended to be primarily male. And she said to me, do you play golf? I said, no, I don't play golf. Why? She says, I don't play golf either, but I've joined the golf club because that's where the guys go to talk about the things that need to be talked about, and they make the decisions there and bring it back. So I can't hit a golf club diddly squat, but I am where they are when the decisions are made. And in the Caribbean, we sort of have the same kind of thing. We make the decisions at the bar, we make the decisions where, and women are not necessarily at the place where those things used to be discussed. And so we have to find ways to ensure not only that we support each other, mentor each other, coach, advocate for each other, but we also have to insist that when the decisions get made, that our voices are heard as well. And so we either go where they are or bring them where we are. Otherwise, we can still find ourselves closed out of decision making, and that's a reality. So when we talk about how decisions are made, we also have to talk about where and who, because oftentimes the where and the who may close women out of decision making, particularly in the area of politics, but not only in the area of politics. Thank you.
Yes, I'm with you there, that it's where these decisions are taken, and women are not literally sitting at those tables or hanging around those bars, particularly in the case of the Caribbean, right? Because we're somewhere doing the supermarketing and picking up the children. And so, but yes, it is the issue of the point of decision making, and it goes back to my glass bottom, metaphor, that you need to really realize what is happening under the surface, because that is where there's a lot that's going on that does affect women's progress and the decisions taken in an organization. How do we do that? I do strongly believe that women will not or should not have any equivalent, because that's a socialization that we have not had. But what we do have as women is the sisterhood, the sense of supporting each other. I think what we do need to do is to be more vocal in that support, because there are women who are at that table many times, or at that bar, and they are not always helping their colleagues when they hear what is happening. And that is the difference. That is where the Boys Club is extraordinarily powerful. It's that networking. And I'm so happy that we have more and more organizations networking women, Will, that you have. I know you're speaking to international women right after this, so that the women have more and more fora, which we don't only speak about our children and our recipes. We do as well, but that we also speak about what's going on in organizations, not just ours, and able to then help each other as decisions come up, or you feel confident. I can call Carla if there's something happening that in CARICOM that I want some clarification on. She can call me if there's something at the university. So that building of a massive network, that's where we women are strong, and we should use that to our advantage to what I call defeat the Boys Club.
I think, wow, Dr. Barnett, you opened up the storytelling section, because I do have a little story to tell. And that is when I was 5 years old, living in England, my sisters and their two friends decided to go play in the attic. And one of my sisters said, "That floor looks very interesting. Let's jump on it." But it was a glass ceiling. And they all fell through the glass ceiling. Thankfully, none of them were injured. So I was recalling this incident as we started to think about this discussion. So I called, not my sister, I called one of the friends, if they remembered that story. And I asked her, why do you think I didn't jump with you guys? And she said, well, back in the 60s, men didn't want to break the ceiling for the women. So that's why I didn't follow them. So I guess we've come a long ways. Yes, I think there's a long ways to go. I really want to thank everybody for participating as you all did. Thank you for our illustrious panelists. We really, really appreciate your time, your candor, and your openness with us. I think we've learned a lot, and we will be, there's a lot of persons who are chat room to you all. We will be taking your emails if you would like to leave them, and we can just keep in touch with you. And the recording will obviously be on the 3 major platforms of Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So our sincere thanks to Whiteboard Labs team for organizing these sessions in commemoration of 111 years as celebrating International Women's Day. Remember though, International Women's Day is officially held on March the 8th, but unofficially, every day is International Women's Day. How's that? So thank you, everybody. Please keep in touch with the Whiteboard's link, as we will be having another discussion, hopefully from either Australia or one of the other countries in that part of the world, so we can get a broader perspective. Please feel free to join the LinkedIn YouTube that we did with the Indian professionals last week, which was very insightful as well. So again, Dr. Luiz Longsworth and Dr. Carla Barnett, it was such a pleasure having you on this forum. Wish you all the very best in your endeavors, and we'll chat again soon. Bye for now.
Thank you
very
much.
And thank you very much for inviting me. It was my pleasure. Thank you.